Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. In this video, I'm going to talk about volumetric lighting in Octane 2021. There's some easier ways to get it set up than it used to be. It used to be kind of tricky and complicated. Now it's actually super easy. And I'm going to show you some, methods for getting some more realism out of your images with some dust. And obviously this is pretty heavily dusty, but dust and particle systems, and you see some differences in the volumetric lighting here, some light rays, sort of light and dark areas, stuff like that, using gobos or polygons to like block out portions of the volume to just add more realism to the image. So let's just take a close look at some of these images in Nuke first. And by the way, this is Nuke non-commercial, so anybody can download this. I suggest you just get it, kind of mess around with it if you're interested in compositing. It's just, obviously it's Nuke, it's got a lot going for it, so you can just download it for free and just start messing around with it. So okay, so this is rendered out at 8K, so I'm just gonna really push in. Actually, you know what? Let me show this one first. So this is the camera pulled back, and so this is what we're looking at. This is volumetric spotlight up here, shining down, obviously, and there's some gobos here, which are just little polygon cutouts, little donut holes, basically. You can see blocking a lot of the light and letting some through, and getting some of those light and dark areas, that shadowy effect going on there. And there's a little bit of additional HDR lighting. I like to use HDR as sort of a fill light. So there's a sort of a warm colored HDR with about a 0.25 or 25% intensity, just sort of getting the fill on there. You can kind of see it on the side of the desk, that sort of orangish light. And so when you look in, let me just go back to this big 8K one here. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, so let's just push in here and Nuke and take a look at some of these little dust particles. So and you can see there's a lot of different kinds of dust, right? There's these little squiggly lines here, these little hairs or fibers that float around. There's also these little puff balls, right? So little sort of, I guess, static electricity, sort of taking those fibers and pulling them together into little balls. And those are, just all throughout the scene. So they're on all the geometry, and I'll show you how that's set up. It's with a series of weight maps and fall-offs to sort of determine where the replicator should place, or the surface particle generator should place the particles, and then the replicator replicates all of these dust particles to it. And yeah, it looks pretty realistic in there. Same with back here. You can see it kind of clumping up on the top here. And if you look just in the volume, I'm using a particle cloud item in MODO, which is pretty useful. It's kind of hidden in there, so you can be forgiven if you didn't know it existed. And that's just getting a nice volume of particles that are then again fed into a replicator, and then these little fibers and puffballs are brought in. And depth of field really helps here. Again, that one's sort of in focus, and there's some out of focus ones here. Just really adds to the realism of it. Okay, so let's see. See, this one's got, this is just a black, actually, just running with black textures here so you can see these a little bit better. This is actually good to look in. So if you look at these, sorry, zooming a little weird here, there's a lot of different colors going on here. I just didn't use gray for the dust. So on the full color one, it's a little bit harder to see this variation, but against black, you can see there's a lot of variation here, right? There's some reds and blues and greens. And again, I just think it helps with the realism. If you think of dust as really just little particles or little fibers and things like that from your clothing or whatever floating around out there, it helps to like add a little color in there and just add a little more realism. At the top of the light here, you can see that again. So quite a bit of color in there, right? There's a big red one. Okay, so what does this look like in MODO, and how do we set up the dust, and how do we set up the volume lights? So first I'm going to do the volume lights because I think that's what most people are going to be interested in, and then we'll go in and do the dust. Okay, here we are in MODO with Octane 2021. I'm going to show you how to do a spotlight first, which is sort of a special case. There's a nice, quick and easy way to do spotlights, and with area lights and luminous polygons, which I'll show you those two as well. It's a little more involved. You have to do an environmental medium, which I'll show you how to set up. But first, the spotlight. And the spotlight is actually quite easy. And if you use Cinema 4D or Houdini or some other host program other than MODO, you should be able to follow along and sort of get it done in there as well. Just look for channels of the same name. So here's our spotlight. And if I turn on the Octane volumetric light switch, it's really kind of as easy as that. You click that on and you click on visible to camera. And there it is. You even have the little barn doors up there, which are kind of cute, but not super useful. But you've got the spotlight. And there's a couple of channels you want to adjust to get this sort of looking better. And the first one is just the throw distance. It defaults to 1, so I'm going to bump that up to like 3.2 just to get it to go all the way down. And then the cone width, of course, you can adjust that here as well. I'm just going to drag it out so I get most of my torus in there. And the next thing I think you should adjust is the surface brightness. Now, surface brightness is checked by default, and this can be, some people get confused by this in Octane, and hopefully I can explain this correctly, or I'm correct in explaining it. When it's checked, surface brightness will ignore the surface area of your light emitting object, and typically that's like a area light or a luminous polygon or piece of geometry, right? Where the power of the light is sort of multiplied by the size of it. So really big area light to the power of 3 put out a lot more light than a little tiny area light to the power of 3. If you click surface brightness on, it just ignores the whole size thing, and you just get a consistent amount of brightness. And you'd think that would make sense with a spotlight because it's just a point, but it actually has a pretty dramatic effect on the volumetric aspect of it. So right now you can see this cone. It doesn't seem to have any interaction with this torus at all, and it's just this sort of one dull color. If I turn off surface brightness, you'll get a lot more heat up top, right? A lot more brightness up top, and it falls off in that sort of inverse squared method. But if I crank up the intensity from 3 to say 25, you'll notice a pretty dramatic difference. And here you really do notice, you see that sort of inner donut hole, like the light pouring through that, and you have just a much more interesting looking volumetric light here, also much hotter near the top of it and dimmer near the bottom. If I turn surface brightness back on, it just goes back to that just sort of vanilla cone, right? And I really have to crank up the radiant intensity to some insane level, like 50,000, to get that same effect, right? So this is surface brightness on, I'm getting the same effect, but I have a value of 50,000 in radiant intensity, which is like, I don't think working with giant numbers is very intuitive. So I think you're better off like turning that off and turning this down to like 25 and just working with surface brightness off to get that kind of effect. All right, there's a couple more channels in here that are useful. The most useful one is the light medium. So you can see that right here. And if I want to hook up some Octane textures to that, I go to my schematic. And here I've got the spotlight already dragged in here. And you can see, actually, let me just remove these and do it from scratch so you can just remove these nodes. Okay, so let's do it from scratch. I got my spotlight here. I'm just going to add selected to get my spotlight in here. I also had my environment selected, so I've got that in there as well. I'll just keep it in because we actually need that for the area light. And then for my spotlight, if I look at the channels and I just type in medium, if I don't have anything typed in, you just see all the channels on the light. And the Octane ones have little parentheses, Octane on there, right? You see it right here, light medium, there it is. But again, just use the search bar just to get medium, and you see light medium Octane, drag it in. So again, in this case, the medium is like water droplets in the air, or like oil fog in the air, fog machine in the air. And that's what the light's reflecting off of. What we want to do is just hook up a regular Octane medium node, the same kind of node you'd use for like subsurface scattering, right? So just scattering medium, and you just plug that right into the light medium there. Notice it goes black, so there's two things we have to change. One is the scattering. For whatever reason, it just defaults to 0 or black, so crank it up to white, and now you can see we've got that really thick looking, sort of velvety looking light in there. And so the other thing you need to do is just knock the density down from 100 to like 0.5. And there you just go to a nice looking volumetric light there. But what's cool with the medium is you can actually color this independently of the light. So we can color a medium, let's just make it sort of a warmish, orangish color. And then our light, we can actually change the light to like a bluish color. And get a very different kind of look here, right? So you can get a little more creative like that. And so that's what you can get with adding a medium and texturing it. We can also texture with like a noise. So I unhook absorption here, and I hook up a gradient to absorption. So just do new texture. We'll grab gradient 2. And then as an input to the gradient, let's add some noise. So the gradient's just going to recolor this noise basically. So we'll just add some noise and plug that in. And so let's adjust our gradient. Let's just start off with like black and white. So we'll just go black. Kind of see where the noise is in here. So if I go to the noise and maybe change it to turbulence, and then actually Perlin, we'll just keep it Perlin. We'll just bump up the scale to like 2000 or something. So maybe let's do 500. So you can see sort of the blotchiness in there. Actually, I'll just go ahead and let me change that back to turbulence if it shows up better. So see the blotchiness. That's what we're getting. So we're texturing, putting some noise into the volume there. And of course you can animate that and everything and get that sort of cool looking volumetric foggy look. That's what we're doing here. Whoops, not 100, 1,000. Come on, Greg. 1000. And yeah, then of course you can color it with our gradient here, right? So instead of black and white, we can go sort of a darkish, warmish yellow, and then sort of a orange or something like that. Color that, and we'll change our light back to like a yellowish light. So something along those lines there. Okay, that was our spotlight. So let's jump over and do a light polygon. So let me turn off the spotlight, and there's my little light polygon. And we'll do this area light as well right next to it. So I'm actually going to flip the area light off, and we'll just turn it on once we get this set up. So it's a little more complex with light polygons and area lights. You need to set up an environmental medium. There's not a nice little light medium specifically for these lights like there was with this sort of special case spotlight. So, okay, the environmental medium is again, it's just a medium being like it's, like water vapor in the air, but in the environment, right? Or smoke machine, right? So you can see the oily smoke, so you can see the lights can reflect off that medium. And so you just go to the schematic, and in MODO, those channels are on the environmental node. So we'll just add that environmental node into our schematic, and under the channels here, I'm going to look for medium, and you'll see all the Octane channels. By the way, I always have in parentheses Octane, so you always know that they're Octane on them. So we need both of these, the medium and the medium radius. And we'll get to the medium radius in a second, because that's actually a very important one, and nothing's going to work if you don't get both of these right. So we've got that, and then we've got our light here. So let me just fire up our scene, and I'm going to add an Octane override to this light so I can hook up these Octane nodes in the schematic. And there's a great trick with these that a guy named Funk, who I always go to for advice on Octane, he's a really knowledgeable Octane user, showed me. And I don't know if he came up with it or if somebody else did, but it's a fantastic trick for these luminous polygons. So what you do is, let's start with our environment node. So let me go over to the environment. And we're going to hook up a medium, just like we did with the light medium earlier. So we go over to the medium textures here. We'll just use a scattering medium. There's a couple of things we need to do on this. First, we need to change the scattering. It comes in at black or 0, which for the life of me, I don't know why it should come in. Like, if you're adding scattering, you probably want scattering. So crank it up to 1. And then, also, before I go back and do this, well, actually, let me finish this. And then you're going to turn the density. You see us super black. Turn the density way down, like 0.5 or something, even 0.05, like that. So you can see this medium happening here. Now it's at 0.05. So it's not very dense at all. And you can see that we're getting this sort of gray haze on everything. So that is working fine. One thing you want to make sure of is in the environmental node here, you don't want like an HDR going on, or, I mean, you can, but the problem is, like, if you have an HDR going on or a color in the scene, if I turn this white to black, you'll see that I'm not getting that gray anymore. Even like a HDR or an environmental color is going to light up that medium. So let's just turn it to black now so we can concentrate on just this light here, right? So the other aspect you want to deal with is the medium radius. And so let me actually go back to my light and just crank it up a little bit so you can see what's going on. So here's my light, and I'm going to crank up the power to like 500. So there we go. So we're getting something, right? Surface brightness clicked is fine, because again, we're dealing with, we don't want to have the size of the light take part in the power calculation. So just keep surface brightness on, that's fine. You're better off with a smaller light. You'll notice that it's sort of spraying out everywhere. And so that's one of the things we're going to work on with this little trick. And you also notice that, I've got some nice volumetric shadows going on here as well. So looks pretty good. The environment's looking good. Again, if I had this medium turned up to white, it would just sort of cloud everything out. So let's just keep that off for now. And let me go back and look at the environment node again. Medium radius is important. So medium radius is, right now, you'll see it is set to, let me just filter it out here. So it's set to 9. So if I think it defaults to 1. If I put this back on 1, we're not getting anything. You're going to think this is broken, right? So you set everything up and you forget to adjust your median radius, and you'll think something's not working. You'll see something's not working. So what the median radius is the median radius is just, think of the median, this environmental median, as just a sphere around your camera. And the radius is how far away from the camera that sphere is filled with your median, your water droplets, whatever. And it needs to be far enough to encompass all your objects, right? So my camera is pretty far from my torus. It's way over here. It's about 6 meters away. So I need, the radius of my sphere has to be more than 6 meters, probably 8 or 9 meters to encompass both the torus and my light here. So we'll just have to crank that up. So let's go back over to my channels, and my environmental median needs to be, let's call it 10. And now it's encompassing. It'd be nice if there's like a little dotted line or a little sphere showing us how big it was, but there's not. So you could set up a sphere geometry, I guess, and hook up the channels, the radius to this if you really want to visualize it. But good enough. Just has to be big enough to encompass everything, so now we can see it, okay? But we can do more with this and make it even better. So the cool trick that Funk showed was this. So we go over to our light polygon, and you'll notice this distribution channel. The distribution channel sort of maps out where all the the path tracing takes place, so the little light rays are shooting out. And right now it's everywhere, so it's just sort of spilling out at all angles from this polygon. And what we want to do is sort of make a cone, right? So what we can do is add a texture there, and we're going to add the fall off texture. Now the fall off map, you'll see right off the bat it did something, right? I added that. I could actually take off this direction. I don't really need that. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, but we'll just delete it. Fall off map is typically used for something like a Fresnel effect, right? You want a bigger effect on the glancing angles than on the straight on angles. And that works nicely for reflection. Here we want it kind of the opposite. Here we've got a lot of distribution on the glancing effect, but nothing straight on. So we want to invert this. So keep the mode to normal versus eye ray, right? So we want to do the minimum value instead of 0, 1 to get everything at a sort of facing value to be high. And then the maximum value, so on the glancing angles, we're going to put it 0, so it's going to sort of fall off towards the edge there. We can also lower our skew factor a little bit to bring that down. So yeah, we're going to get this, we'll just put it all the way down to 1. So it's turning into more of a cone here instead of just spraying out everywhere. And that's, so that's really exactly what we want. We can get that sort of cone effect. And probably even with minimum value, like adjust it a little more. Yeah, so if I crank the maximum value up, I get coming all the way towards the edges here, but if I go down to 0, it's more of a cone effect, right? So it's more concentrated going down. And you can actually add a little color correction node in between these two. So we'll just do new texture and color correction right somewhere. Down here maybe. It'd be nice if we could search these nodes. Have a little filter like we do with channels. So yeah, we can crank up the contrast and the color correction like 50. And yeah, see how that makes even a sharper line there. So it's a nice little trick for adjusting or sort of having control over the fall off of our light ray there. So there it is, right? And we can turn on our area light now. I'll just turn it on. It's sort of right next to it. So here's our area light right there. Now area light also has a distribution channel, although I'm not sure this trick is going to quite work with it. Let me turn off the polygon. There's our area light. And again, these tend to work better if it's small. If our area light's huge, it just kind of blows everything out. So a little small light. Make sure surface brightness is checked on here. Let's go to down to the Octane group here. So yeah, surface brightness is checked. We have pretty high intensity, like 500. Let me see. This is sort of just, I'm not sure if this distribution is going to work with an area light, but we'll try. So we'll just go back to this workspace here. This area light will have a distribution channel. So here it is right here. So I can actually drag the area light into the scene, and I can drag that distribution channel into the scene, and I can attempt to hook up a fall off texture, but this may not actually work. New texture, oops. New texture, fall off, which is right here. And can I plug that in? I can. Okay, I think it actually will work. So let's just do the same thing here. We'll just do 1, whoops, 1 there, 0 here, fall off. We'll just turn that to 1, and we'll add a color correction node in between. Drag down. Where's our color correction? Right there. And is that going to work? That may not work. Let's see. Whoops, fall off map has to be like this. So let's go, whoops, don't need that. Let's do fall off to input and color correction to distribution. Sorry. And crank up the contrast to like 50 or so. And yeah, actually it does work with an area light. So the same trick will work with both an area light and a light polygon. So they are both are in the scene. Okay, so that's the volumetric lights. It's one of the most common questions I see about Octane is just how do you make volumetric lights? So hopefully this is useful. Let's take a look at the dust real quick if you're interested in this kind of thing. So this is a bunch of objects from Quixel Mixer, or Quixel, not Quixel Mixer, Quixel Bridge, whatever. Quixel Scan. All right. I obviously pulled in the highest like density scans I could for this, and because I knew it was going to render it at a really high resolution. So what we have here is a series of surface particle generators, which take a mesh as an input and then scatter particles about the surface according to some rules. Those rules in this case are based on some procedural weight maps, which I'll show you how to create. So we have a mesh, we have some procedural weight maps, we have some particles scattered on the mesh, following these rules set by the weight maps in terms of where to place the particles. And then those are fed into a replicator, and these replicators use the particles as a particle source, and they scatter these little dust threads and dust balls on each of these particles. The little dust threads I got from ArtStation. This is it, Easy Dust. There's a little Houdini tool, but I just bought like the curves only for $3. I buy a ton of like kit bash stuff on ArtStation. This is one of the things I bought. Also bought some some just grunge maps on here that I also used in this project. And if I look at the little dust curves, let me just turn them on here and select one and isolate it. Control A to center it in the viewport. You see it's just this little curve here. I'm gonna go to polygon mode. Yeah, there's just a bunch of these little guys. See these little squiggly curves here? There's about 20 or so of them. And then what I did is I would just multi-select a bunch of them like this, and then select the polys and Control C for copy. And then I'd create a new empty mesh item by pressing N, and then just paste those guys back down. Looking at the top, I would rotate some of these around a little bit, so just E for rotate. And then you can actually press and hold E and select another guy, another polygon, and let go of E, and it'll pop your tool handle back on. So I'll just push and hold. This is a sort of selection method in MODO, which not enough people use probably. Let go, now you can change it. Select through, sort of temporarily disabling the tool handle by holding the tool hotkey down, and then when you let go, the tool handle pops back up. So you just hold it down, select something, let go, pops back up, rotate it again. So pretty nice, right? And so I've got a few things here, but to really get a nice dust ball, let's grab all these polygons, and then we'll just use scatter clone. So here's scatter clone. I'll just press space to pop up the mini props and pin it. We want the range to be a millimeter, because these are actually really little. There's the range is a millimeter. So count of 5, we'll just duplicate these like 5 times, maybe turn this up to 15. And then you just click to activate it. Actually, you want rotation to be 360 in all directions. So hit Control-Alt-Enter, it'll put in all 3 of these. Same as scale. So scale, if I do like 33%, it'll make some 33% bigger, some 33% smaller. Once I get all these in here, if I just click down, it'll do the scattering. And it's still live, so I can right-click and you can see the count here changing, so I can get more or less of them, and blah blah blah. I can middle mouse to change the scale, or what else do I have here? Range is left mouse, so I can increase or decrease the range. But yeah, we just have a nice little dust ball here now, right? Nice little dust ball. And so I'm just actually going to delete this, but these were all then put into a group. And so I go here to groups, and I hit new group and just call it, let's call it dust B, and hit OK, and it places all of these guys in a group. And that group is then used for our replicators. So let me go back over and take a look at the replicators. So here you can see all the replicators, all little replicated items on these guys. And if I took with this wire replicator here, I can actually hit the mini props. Right, the prototype is just that group of little dust meshes, the fibers and dust balls, and the point source is this surface particle generator here, which is controlled by some weight maps. So I'll get to that in 1 second. Just making sure you know how these replicators are set up. We'll just actually isolate the replicator, and then over here are these little tool icons up here, or viewport icons. Are actually really useful, so make sure you know what they do. This one will isolate whatever item you have selected. It'll hide everything else, and then this one, the 4 little circles, this is the replicator. So if we set selected, it'll actually show those prototypes. It'll actually show all the little dust balls and fibers instead of bounding boxes. You can kind of see how that's working there. If I control click another guy, I'll probably bring those on. So let's look at our, those are two lights, all the little dust balls on there. And then the cloud dust, you can click that. You can see all the little guys floating. And then the replicators on the desk. This is probably a big one. May take a second. Oh, actually that plane is hidden. Let me turn surface particles back on. There it is. So there's the desk one as well. So there's a lot going on here. So I'm actually going to, since this scene is so loaded, I'm going to start a new scene and just show you how this is set up really quickly. The last one here is this particle cloud. It's just an item you can add here, like just a particle cloud item right there. And if you haven't used this before, it can be, it can be, a cube or a sphere or a cylinder. And you just fill it with particles and then feed those particles into a replicator. And again, each one of those little dust items is then scattered onto it or copied to it. So that's all that one is for the ones that are floating in the air. We'll just turn that back to cube. So let me create a new scene here. All right, I've got an empty scene here. I'm going to show you how these particles are set up, right? Both the weight maps and the surface particle generators and the replicators. And yeah, so let's just start with empty mesh, and we're going to make a plane. So add operator, we'll add a cube and pop up an item props here and size wide is 0. Press C for channel haul and just right click and drag. I'll just hide the grid there and turn on wireframe. Right click and drag. By the way, you see me pop open these pie menus super fast all the time. Control 1, just get used to using that. So I'm just toggling the grid on and off with Control 1. And Control 1, I'm also toggling on and off wireframe, right? Like that, on and off. So Control 1, Control 2, often I'll use Control 2 to switch between wireframe or default or advanced or whatever. So Control 1, Control 2, get used to those if you don't use those a lot. Anyway, so I'm just right clicking and dragging with channel haul to get a bunch of these, just a dense grid here, right? Maybe 150 on, we don't need any on Y, just one, but 150 on X and Z. So it's pretty dense, and any weight map we put on here will be pretty dense. Press C to drop the channel haul tool. And then we could just rename this plane. I'm going to add a couple more things here and close that mesh ops there. I'm going to add a replicator to the scene. I'm also going to add a surface particle generator to the scene right there. I'm also going to press in for another empty mesh item, and I'm going to add a sphere, just a sphere here. Again, press C for channel haul and left click drag for radius. We're just going to make it really small, like 1 millimeter small. I could just type it in 0.01, Control Alt Enter for all 3 channels at once, and everything else is fine. So we've got our sphere, and let's just call it ball or sphere or whatever. And okay, we're kind of set up here to get going on this. So the surface particle generator is going to scatter particles on whatever surface you feed to it. So our source surface is going to be the plane, and it's going to be putting particles on here. Now, if you can't see the particles, let me just make sure locators are visible. So Control 1, toggle locators. I'm just going to pull back here. They're also super hard to see. You see me pulling back and see these little orange dots here? Those are the particles in the surface particle generator. They're almost impossible to see close up. If I just Control 2, go to wireframe, you can see them a little better. And this is channel haulable, so I can press C for Omni Haul and right click and drag like you always do to increase the particle count, or you can left click to reduce the average spacing, so I get more of them there. The reason I set up this replicator is because these little particles are so hard to see, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's just set the average spacing to like 0.02, or super dense, right? And let's increase our particle count to a lot, like 100,000, just a bunch. So it fills up this whole plane here, right? So average spacing 2, minimum spacing 0.02, and particle ceiling maybe 150,000. Yeah, should cover it all up there. Okay, lots of particles, a whole bunch of them. And if I look at the replicator and I feed this the point source, the surface particle generator, into the replicator, and the prototype as the ball, all the little balls are going to pop up there. So we got all these little balls there now too, right? If we look at this in the schematic, it's a little bit easier to follow. So if I add the replicator and the plane and the ball all to the schematic, we can see how this is hooked up, right? We've got our surface particle generator, or our plane is being fed into the surface particle generator. It's scattering little particles on it. It's then fed into the replicator as the particle source, and then we have the little ball also fed into the replicator as the prototype, which is then scattered on the particle source. Of course, in our dust scene, it's not just a ball; it's a whole bunch of different, a group of different dust items. But we can see how we're going to create a weight map here to control this. So let's go back to our plane and pop open the mesh op stack, and I'm going to add a set weight mesh op here. So set weight, 2 words, set weight, double click, get that on there. Boop. And we'll call this weight map density, hit enter, press the select weight map to select it. You'll see that it's selected here. And one of the things you want to make sure is get our plane selected and go to not wireframe mode, but default mode. Want to make sure that our under active meshes that show weight maps is on so you can see it. And here I'm going to actually hide the replicator and hide the surface particle generator, so we just see the weight map, right? So just a full weight of 1 to every vertex. Now we're going to modulate that with an image fall off. So tool pipe, add tool pipe. We want image, we want new, and we want an image fall off, image texture fall off, not an image fall off, in the tool pipe there. So we have texture fall off, and the type of texture is an image texture. So type in image. Helps to use MODO if you can spell image map. There we go. And in this image map, over in properties, then you just select your image. And so I actually use an image. Let me just pop open the preset browser here. These are just some imperfection images. Again, I bought these on ArtStation for like $1.50 or something. There's just some really good ones. So here's one that looks like a bunch of smears. So let's pick this one and load that into the scene. I think I had another image in it. Oh yeah, because it was just this one. So we've got this image loaded into the scene now. So again, let's go to our texture here, and then the texture layers properties. Let's pick that image I just loaded in, and you can see that it's being put on there, but it's right now it's a solid projection, and we can see my solid projection texture locator in the scene here. Again, pressing O and under drawing and control, we want to show our texture locator. I'm sorry, visibility. You want to show your texture locators, right? Because we actually need to adjust the texture locator in here to get this image to map properly. So we want to make sure texture locators are visible. And they're actually invisible, filtered out by default. So if I go over here and click filter, it's typically like that with it turned off, so you just don't see them in here because you just really don't want to deal with them on a regular basis. They just kind of clutter the scene up. But this one will just turn it on so you see it in here. And we're going to, instead of using the default solid method, we're going to use a planar method. So we'll just go to planar. And it defaults to a size of 1 meter, which is perfect because it perfectly matches our plane there. We just turn off the wireframe. And you can see this image on there. Okay, so 100% would be white and 0% would be black. So now it's using this image to modulate the weight, and the weight's going to modulate where the particles go. So I'm not quite done yet. I want to do a remap weight map here. So remap weight, and this will just let us crunch around a little bit. So for the map name, we got to type in density. It'd be nice to grab it from a drop down, but we can't do that. So now we have it. And it also, these remap ones, if you've seen my previous videos, it by default inverts them, so which is just annoying as hell. So we're going to re-invert it by dragging black to white and white to black. So this is the way it should be. And now we can start remapping it, right? So I'm going to just select my white and middle mouse, right mouse drag to the right, and just sort of, it's like adjusting levels, right, in Photoshop, right? I'm just, everything to the right of it's going to be 1, so I'm just getting a lot of density on, everything that's white is going to have a lot of particles on it, and the little smeary parts aren't going to have any. And so I can actually, unless I drag this one up with middle mouse, I can get it there as well. But I don't really want particles on the smeary parts. It's kind of like they've been wiped away. And you can actually just click the little gear here and open it up if you want to get a better view of it. You can just sort of navigate in here and you do a bit of something like this maybe to fill it out in between. So yeah, it looks pretty good. And so we're going to use this weight map in our surface particle generator for both density and size. Now, one issue with the surface particle generator, and have I mentioned they need to rewrite this, is that it's not seeing it, right? It's not seeing these procedural weight maps. It has sort of a nonsense name here. Never fear, we can hook these up manually. So here's our plane. I'm just gonna double click my triangle here. We'll see all our mesh operations that we put on here. Let's just get these in order. Again, bottom to top. So here's our set weight, and our set weight has a channel name on here, and that is our map name. So drag that in. There's our map name. It has an output. You see right there. And our surface particle generator also has a couple of map names in here. And so you can grab those channels where they're not working for us to just select it. We can actually grab the channels and drag them into the schematic. So we want the density VMAP and the size VMAP, both of them dragged in. And we're going to connect those to the map name. So we're going to plug it in there, and we're going to plug it in here. Now, if I turn my surface particle generator back on, you can see the particles now are being modulated, right? And if I turn my replicator back on, you can see where those little spheres are, maybe. So here's my replicator. You can see the little spheres there. They're really clustered around those areas right there. And places where we don't want them, they don't exist at all, right? Now you can adjust the scale with the replicator itself. So I go over to my replicator, and you'll know this if you use replicator slab. But let's get a little random scale here, like 33%, Control-Alt-Enter for all three. And it's a sphere, but if they were actually little fibers, you'd want some random rotation, like 360 on Y, and maybe 5 or 10 on X and Z. You don't want them going vertical, right? But so, you know, anywhere on Y and just a little bit on X and Z. And then you can just adjust the base scale. So I'm going to press C for channel haul, and I'm just going to drag with my left mouse button until we get them really sort of thick in these areas here. Remember, this weight map is controlling scale and density. So now it's looking pretty good. If I hide my plane, well, okay, actually, let me show you this. So again, have I mentioned surface particle generator needs to be rewritten? If I hide anything, if I hide the surface particle generator, then it just stops working. And then no longer, it's basically, they're using the eyeball as a means to activate and deactivate it. And it really shouldn't be doing that. It should just be controlling the visibility in the scene. So you need to fix that. So if I turn off the plane, that feeds into it, we lose everything. If I turn off the surface particle generator, we lose everything. So that's just an annoying thing you're going to have to deal with. Is you're going to have to keep these on. The plane, you're going to actually have to go over to, whether you use Octane or MODO, you're going to want to turn off the rendering, right? So render, you'd say no. If you use Octane like I do, you'll want to say camera visibility, shadow, dirt off, right? So it's not going to render, but it provides a place-to-place particles. This is just laying on top of the desk in this scene. So in this scene, the plane is hidden. It's just laying on top of the desk and providing a place for all these little particles to be. So the plane was pretty easy to set up, and the wires and lights, there's just really one more step. So if I press N for a new mesh item here and create just sort of a stand-in wire, let me just turn off some of this stuff. Let me just organize this scene really quickly. So I'll put everything that has to do with the plane in one group, and I will hide it, and we'll start fresh. And I'm just going to, so actually, I'll turn this on for now. Let's make a, using the tube tool, just make a wire real quick. So grab my tube tool here and just start placing some points. And like this, middle mouse is going to default, OmniHaul is going to default for the radius. So middle mouse like that, you can just kind of grab. And then right mouse, of course, is segments. Want a lot of segments in both vertical and horizontal dragging, so both along the length and also the circumference. We want a lot of segments, again, because we're going to be creating a weight map. We'll just make this more like this, so it kind of looks like a wire. All right, looks good. And I'll just maybe move it up above the origin there, so sitting on the plane. Now I can hide the plane, and we'll just call this mesh wire. And so same deal, we're going to create a weight map with set weight map, and we'll call it density. And select the map. There it is. It just creates, every vertex gets 100%. And we're going to modulate this with two different operators now, two different fall offs. So tool pipe, instead of adding an image texture fall off like we did last time, we're going to add a fall off, a blend fall off right here. So blend fall off. And inside my blend fall off, I'm going to add an incidence fall off. So we'll just type in fall off. And it's right here. It's called incidence fall off. And then double click that, and it adds it inside my blend fall off. And this one's interesting. It adds a locator called incidence locator. And if I just press the move tool, make sure you're in item mode, you can move this locator around, and the weight map's just going to kind of follow it around the scene, right? See it moving? And it operates just like the fall off texture we used on those volumetric lights. So if the polygon normals are facing this locator, it gets 100% weight. If I move it to the side, eventually it goes to 0, right? But the ones facing it are always going to get a lot of weight. So, you know, if dust is falling on our wire, it's falling on it from above. And so I move this up top and kind of put it in the middle. And we just, those polygons that are facing it, you know, skewed a little bit to the inside of it, but that's fine, are going to be getting the weight map here. And so I'm going to actually multiply this weight map against that image we had used earlier. So I'm going to add another fall off. And this time we're going to do a texture. We don't want to use the existing texture fall off. We want a new texture fall off, so click a new one. And so we should have 2 of them in the scene now, right? The original one there and the new one here. But this new one, we can actually, for the texture, we can use the existing image that we've already just clear out your search there. The existing roughness map that we had used earlier. Just drag that guy in there for new texture. And we'll set the blend fall off mode instead of add to multiply. Now, it kind of disappeared here. It's there a little bit. There's a tinge of red. And the reason it did is, again, this image right here, if I can double click it or I have to go over to the image map here, it's a lot of gray, right? So there's very little white in here. And we need to actually, again, remap this to get more. You can see it a little bit there. We need to remap that to get that to show up a little more. So instead of using a remap weight map, we'll just use the gradient easing that's in there. So we'll just our set weight, we've got our tool pipe, we've got our blend fall off, and we've got our texture fall off here. And here's our easing gradient. This just lets us remap the weight right here in the same node. And again, it just works like levels in Photoshop. Just right click and drag. Anything to, you can see it's starting to show up here. Anything to the right is just going to get 100%. So we're just sort of, you know, adjusting the, you know, the histogram of that image to get us, you know, more white or more 100% values, right? And those are multiplied against, 1 is multiplied against this incidence fall off, and we get sort of this more natural looking, sort of grungy looking gradient, but it only is on the top, right? Not on the bottom. So looks good. And you just do the same thing. We'll just pop open our schematic here, add a replicator, add a surface particle generator, and we'll just set it all up. So drag these 2 guys down here. And here's our wire, drag this one in, and double click our yellow diamond to get our set weight. Our set weight has a channel on it that we want, the map, whoops, not that value, map name, there it is. Our surface particle generator is going to have a couple of channels we want, and that is, again, size VMAP and dense VMAP. Drag those on there. Map name goes to both of those. And then we're going to drag this into our particle source, and then we'll use the same ball here for our prototype. And don't forget to hook up the source surface here like this. If you don't see anything, don't forget to change the average spacing. So turn that back down to like 3 and minimum spacing 0.02, and you can see everything appearing there. And then we just need to bump up our size with our base scale there. So we'll bump that up to like 500%. You can see those spheres starting to appear on there. And yeah, so we'll random scale. Of course, we're not going to have much random rotation with the sphere, but you get it, right? So that's how I did the particle distribution on the wires. And you can, again, you can just sort of use our instant fall off to adjust where you want those to be, right? Just sort of move it around and it'll remap that weight map in real time. Get those just on the top, not on the sides or the bottom. So yeah, get in there and mess around with volumetric lights and, you know, dust and particles and all that stuff, and, you know, create some moody atmospheric images.
Yum, yum!